Napier. He'll be co-facilitating with me today. Machubu Rahwasha and Renee Raman. They'll be supporting me with the chat feature. So please feel free to, in the meantime, introduce yourselves in the chat. Before we dive in, please, just a few notes for you to be aware of. We are recording the session today. As you see, it's already started, and this will be available on our uKESA YouTube channel. So if you registered for today's session, you'll receive an email with the recording. Otherwise, we'll share the event link at the end of the session, and just keep an eye on that in the coming week for the recording. Please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted during the session. I think that's automatically done. And then, we really welcome your questions. So submit this at any time during the session. We'll handle these after each session, after each presentation is made, but there is a session at the end for open discussion. So just be aware of that. So we are co-hosting this event, and it's titled The Innovation in Disaster Management, and we're specifically looking at policy, early warning, and decision support. We're co-hosting this session with the DSTI, and it forms part of the DSTI Innovation for Inclusive Development seminar series. I don't know if my colleagues, if you could please just indicate if our speaker is ready from the DSTI or how we manage that.
Hi, CISO. No confirmation just yet. Sorry.
Okay, so we'll just I'll ask Mark to maybe start. We'll spin our program around a little bit. So Mark, if you could maybe just start with an introduction to the topic for today, and maybe speak to who our speakers are for today. And if we have an indication, Renee, if you could maybe just alert me. Thanks, Mark. Over to you.
Sure.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming through. We had a very good response in terms of registration, and many thanks to our speakers. We have had word from Dr. Wilfred Lunga, who's in the Central African Republic, that he is having connectivity issues. So we will probably move straight to Tinashe as the first speaker, unless there is a change and Dr. Lunga manages to join us. But just before I introduce more about the speakers, this is a topic that's, it's a very current topic in many of our minds. I see Dr. Masia is in the meeting. He was the possibility of saying a few words from the DSTI's perspective. Can I just check that if Dr. Masia can go ahead?
Yes, I'm here, Mark.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Right. No, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, CISO. And greetings to everyone attending. I've been asked to provide a message of support for the discussion on the important topic of innovation for disaster management, early warning systems, and decision support tools. So as you all know, that South Africa faces increasing threats from floods, drought, wildfires, pandemics, and cyber attacks, and technological crises driven by climate change and deep social and economic vulnerabilities. The recent events such as the KwaZulu-Natal floods and the June 2024 Eastern Cape floods caused widespread destruction, including major loss of life, displacement of thousands, and severe damage to infrastructure across many districts. So as the DSTI, we recently hosted a workshop with DSTI entities, including SANSA, TIA, HSRC, ASAF, NRF, CSRR, and others, just to explore ways in which the National System of Innovation could be mobilized to address climate change-related disasters. This workshop was also followed by a session with the National Disaster Management Center. In all these engagements, what we have learned is that the response to risk and disasters is largely reactive, exposing weaknesses in the adoption of early warning systems, institutional coordination, and resilience building. So in this context, the DSTI, under the directive of DG Dr. Cele, is currently developing an NSI risk and disaster management strategy to guide programs that leverage STI for disaster response. This draft NSI risk and disaster management strategy recognizes that the NSI has a crucial role in addressing these risks through innovation, science technology interventions. Global evidence also shows that early warning systems supported by satellite monitoring, geospatial modeling, artificial intelligence, and mobile communication platforms greatly enhance disaster preparedness and minimize losses. Likewise, applying social and behavioral science enhances the design and the adoption of such technologies, making sure that risk information is accessible, trusted, and actionable across varied social groups. So disaster management is therefore a national priority, vital for protecting lives, infrastructure, and ensuring socio-economic stability. This involves incorporating STI into policy and practice through coordinated efforts among government departments, academia, industry, and communities, and also ensuring that strategies are both scientifically sound and socially inclusive. We therefore need to adopt a comprehensive approach that mobilizes STI interventions at all stages of the disaster risk reduction. It should be an approach that leverages anticipatory capacities, accelerates evidence-based decision-making, and supports resilient recovery pathways. So in today's discussion, I hope you will explore ways to deploy technologies for preparedness, disaster mitigation, and relief, including disaster management decision support tools, and you will also highlight strategies and practical examples of joint procurement and deployment of disaster response technologies. So with those words, I really want to wish everyone a productive session on innovation and technologies for disaster management, early warning systems, and decision support tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Musio, and apologies about that in the beginning. Mark, you can go right ahead.
Great. No, thank you. That's very useful context, and I think that means I can go straight through into just introducing the speakers. As we said, Dr. Lunga hasn't managed to join us today. We hope that we can ask him to record his presentation, which he'd already fully prepared, and then we could ask him if we can release that after the meeting so that you can watch that input. He was to speak on the warnings, early warnings, community linkages, and I think some of so it was using policy and technology for improving disaster resilience. And I think also some of our other speakers will speak to some applications of that. So we'll start with, and I'll just introduce the speakers first, but we'll start with Ms. Tinashe Dube from the CSIR, speaking more at the innovation and building technology level in terms of disaster response from a housing perspective. Tinashe is a social spatial researcher at the CSIR, works in the same offices, and has expertise in green building policy, housing innovation, and climate responsive design, and also a focus on the net zero carbon building strategy, and within the context also of the Human Settlements Roadmap, which is also a DSTI funded initiative, and is a PhD candidate, advanced candidate at the Wits University. Mr. Faisal Sidat from the most important city in the country, eThekwini, is going to speak about citywide informal settlement upgrading strategy from a citywide perspective. And I think Durban has got that great depth of experience in terms of response and vulnerability and improving resilience. with a well-developed approach. So we're looking forward to Mr. Sidat's input. He is Senior Manager for Strategic Planning at the Municipalities Human Settlements Directorate. And then the last presentation before the full discussion will be Dr. Sandile Mbata, who's working now at SM Digital Africa and was previously with COGTA as their National Chief Data Officer, where he championed the establishment of the National Strategic Hub, which I think a lot of us have been hearing about. Dr. Mbata holds a PhD from the University of Stuttgart, and with more than 16 years of experience in the public and non-government sector. So yeah, we very much look forward to these presentations. Again, to thank the speakers for their preparations and to thank you as the audience. Cesar, I can hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So Tinashe, you can start flighting your slides. Tinashe will be sharing some insights on innovation and building technologies for the provision of disaster response housing. Tinashe, you have 15 minutes. I will, and then we've got some 5 minutes after that for questions. I'll let you know when there's about a 2-minute time remaining for you. Okay.
Okay.
I can see your slides and they are in presenter mode.
Okay, thanks so much. And am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for being here. My name is Tinashe Dube. I am an architect and I work for the Infrastructure Innovation Division at the CSIR. Today I'll be presenting on technical responses in terms of architecture and disaster management. I'm going to look quite a bit at emergency housing, and that's because within our group with the parliamentary grant money this year, we looked more towards researching emergency housing, and so what I'll be presenting is more the outcomes that have come out from that. So we'll look at emergency housing in South Africa. I'll give a bit of an overview on international precedents in emergency housing because it's important to understand that. I'm going to speak to a concept called STRUs, Sustainable Transitional Residential Units, and then I will also look at the IBT approach. I do feel IBTs are quite a buzzword, and we have a tool that is decision support based with regards to that. So that's the overview of the presentation. So let me just move this aside here. The background to what we looked at with our emergency housing research was just the overview of emergency housing in South Africa. So we know that within South Africa, we have a general human settlement crisis before we even talk about emergency housing. So people generally have a shortage of housing, and that's lower income groups that suffer. And so that same group that is in the category of vulnerable in terms of housing also tends to suffer a lot with emergency housing. So with emergency housing, when it is provided, it's typically located quite far out. It takes a bit of a while to build up. Well, this is what our findings discovered. And then you will have a typical unit that's built and it's intended to be temporary, but it tends to become like almost like a formal or a permanent settlement, and people tend to like live there, you could almost say, for the rest of their lives, and other people move in, etc. So the housing typology that's often associated with emergency housing, it's not always the case. Some of them are more permanent than others, but just the scenario where people always stay in them for like years to come afterwards is quite typical. So the image on the right shows a TRU, that's a temporary residential unit, which is a typical emergency housing response within South Africa. The TRU is made out of materials that don't last so long. They don't have the best insulation properties in terms of sound and warmth. And there's also just the aspect of human dignity. And then what we're bringing in a lot into the discussion in the built environment these days is sustainability. So looking at this as the scenario, we went into looking for a solution. So our solution for emergency housing looked at units that are prefabricated, because if it's emergency housing, it's an emergency. So people need to build it nice and fast. So prefabricated units work the best for that, or modular parts that fit together. And then something that doesn't require earthworks. This is like an approach, right? Something that doesn't require mechanical fixings, something that has no wet works. So when I talk about earthworks and wet works for the ordinary person, we know that cement takes 21 days minimum to dry. So that's typically bricks and mortar, and then with the cement in the foundation. So that's going to be a whole procurement process that needs to happen. And then we still need to mix the cement, pour it, and let it dry. So we want to avoid that sort of thing. And then the bricks and mortar, and then simple transferable skills for construction, and something that's rapid to deliver. So in short, if I could put it in layman's terms, what we're proposing as an emergency housing approach is housing units that can be built by, in a dream scenario, volunteers, whether it's students from America or students from Joburg, rushing out to the site who know nothing about construction, but if you teach them the basics, they can put it together. But then we also want these units to be longer lasting. We want them to be more dignified. And then we also want them to be sustainable. So with regards to this, we also have an approach called the Sustainable Transitional Residential Units, instead of TRUs, which I'll cover shortly. And then we have our IBT analyzer tool, which also just looks at materials that could work for that. So just giving an overview of how emergency housing options look. Let's look at international precedents, starting with the name in emergency housing. His name is Shigeru Ban. He's an architect, and he's from Japan. Shigeru is called all over the world to provide architectural solutions. He has built a couple of solutions. The most typical one is this cardboard rice paper unit. If you look just a bit lower here, this is how he's used that material for an emergency housing solution where people were living within like a multi-purpose center. So that was like disaster response for everybody, just immediate shelter for them, but very, very temporary. And then a more long-term solution that he's provided and keeps rolling out in different forms is this cardboard roll house. So it's waterproof, though not the most waterproof, has good insulation properties, so it keeps in the warmth and the sound. It is dignified, and then you can see this one is on a raised platform. With them, what it seems what Shigeru Ban has is that he has sort of a procurement arrangement, or some sort of understanding of when there's an emergency, there's a place where these cardboard rolls have already been set out and provided, and they ship them in or they fly them in because they're really lightweight. So it's a very quick construction process from these modular units. They put it up, and then because it's made from paper, it's biodegradable. So once it's done, it returns to the grave. So it's biodegradable. And then other solutions that are a bit popular are modular units made out of timber. And then we have a number of IBT solutions in South Africa. You can look at the Agrima listing for those. One such example is this one in Eastern Cape that was built by a company called Maladi, which I'm sure quite a few people are familiar with. Then there's another approach to responsive architecture and emergency housing after Hurricane Sandy in New York. There's this approach where they say, okay, look, we understand the water is going to come, so we're not going to build to stop it. We're going to build to let it happen. So just this proposal that houses should have a base, or even commercial buildings should have a base that is permeable and allowable for letting water enter and pass, rather than it being sort of like a barrier and getting flooded and all of that. So in the event of a flood, people will just move their things up to the next floor, let it happen, let it dry, and move forward. Another such example where people are just like, let's let it happen, is in Venice, Italy. You can see here water to, let's say, ankle level. You can see just on the right, you've got these, let's assume that they're tourists sitting in a city square. They've got their gumboots on. Venice is located almost like an island between canals. So the canals are always waterlogged, but they have this annual time of the year where they say, okay, let's just let the water happen, and they just, accommodate it. So that is actually an approach. And And then maybe just before I move to the next slide, we know of the typical example in Tokyo where buildings are like the skyscrapers and they're many, many stories high, and people just build them to be resilient for the earthquake. So it's not that it's supposed to.
Tinashe, it's still on the Venice slide on my side.
Oh, yes, I don't have a Tokyo slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thanks for that. The Tokyo buildings just also give a tolerance. This just speaks to the example of giving tolerance, the mental image of allowing for tolerance rather than always evacuating people or always just like building flood barriers. So the Tokyo buildings just allow for the shaking and movement, and then in Venice they allow for the water. And then lastly, it's an approach that's perhaps not spoken about a lot, but it's also something we need to think about in housing and emergency housing, although people really do not like the image that it represents, but there's learning to be taken from indigenous knowledge systems. Here we've got a mud hut. I have used the wording cradle to grave sustainability approach because if a mud hut is built typically in a rural area or a typical rural area as it used to be, you'd find that the sustainable materials are sourced from the locality. So it's cow dung for plastering the floors and the walls. The bricks are made from mud from the local water source, such as like a river. The grass is from a local area. And if no one is to attend to this building, it will fall apart and just be biodegradable without any carbon footprint at all. It will just maybe look untidy, but the earth goes untouched. And then there's also approaches to elements such as sound insulation and temperature insulation that are responsive to the climate and the conditions. If you just look at these various hut typologies and how they're built, there's a lot of knowledge to be taken from this. I remember specifically, I visited a site and there was an older woman who was the mother to the client, an African lady in her mid 60s. She was about 65. And she listened to me, and we're trying to locate where this building should be located on the site. It was slightly sloped, just slightly sloped. So she gave me a whole speech about when it rains, the water trickles here. There you can see that this vegetable garden is really green because of that, but there it's really dry. She really took like 5 minutes to explain to me how water flows on the site. And then she said, so given what I've told you, where are you going to locate this building? And for all the education that I have, I couldn't tell her. I say this example to just say that there's a lot that we can learn from indigenous systems about placement and materials, and we need to lean into that as we come up with solutions for housing and emergency housing. Then we have this element of sustainable transitional residential units. It was proposed by the late Jeremy Gibbard. It's actually his concept, and he did a whole paper on it. The sustainable transitional residential units are located within what we would call, let's say, urban areas or main urban areas. So rather than an emergency housing solution being placed like way out there, he proposes that a housing unit is made where they use the same principles that we've said, where it can be rapidly deployed with minimal infrastructure. It can be adaptable, made from sustainable materials, and it should provide dignity to its users. In the example that he gave, he basically proposed that vacant plots of land within urban areas, here it's actually specifically Sunnyside, can be used for these STRUs, so these emergency housing location sites. And these households will have multi-sector benefits. This includes benefits to the households where there's reduced commuting cost and improved living and quality, as well as extra disposable income because people don't have to spend so much traveling. So much time traveling. Hopefully they can also keep their jobs because they're in the same locality rather than being placed all the way out. Then entrepreneurs and contractors will obviously make money from the building approach and the construction of the emergency housing. Businesses will have lower transport dependency and then greater worker reliability and flexibility. Municipalities and landowners can use their vacant land for different use, and then government also benefits from this, and then the environment has reduced emissions, energy use, and health-related benefits. Ultimately, he does propose that we take into consideration that these STRUs will be growing settlements. So I just put this image over here to just sort of express that, where we have infill housing. So it's housing that was provided. This is just the shell. and then people end up providing their infill. It doesn't mean that we literally are proposing this solution, but it's just the idea that just because somebody moved there because there was a flood in 2025, just assume that their whole family might one day live there. So you might find them 30 years there down the line, and then we need to design and build in consideration for that and everything that they'll need to do on that site as a family. Lastly, I'm just going to go through the IBT Analyzer tool, which is what we used to run through our research for emergency housing. And we were like, okay, so what would we build emergency housing out of now that we know what it needs to do and we know where it needs to be located? So we used a tool which was built by the CSIR for the NHBRC, which aligns with the SANS 10400 energy zones. And it's an IBT analyzer tool, innovative building technology analyzer tool, which basically looks at performance factors like thermal, fire, durability, and acoustic factors, and then weighs them. So you can just put what you need. You just literally click on the website. You open the website, and then you click on your location, and then you click a few specifics about what you're looking at, and then it rates the IBT tools on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 0 being the lowest. So there are 57 IBTs that are listed on that IBT tool of ours. So remembering that we were looking for something that's prefabricated or modular, has mechanical fixing, and then doesn't need wet works. We ran it through the IBT analyzer, and we got 21 performing systems. This is just an overview of what those results would look like. It's literally a table, and then these are the scores, and then it's like mentions, is it prefabricated, mechanically fixed, wet works, etc. And what we landed on was building a modular timber unit, which we're going to build on the CSIR test site. It's about 27 meters squared. So it's a temporary housing. It counts as temporary. It does meet most of the national regulations, but it gets away with a bit of it because it's a temporary unit. It meets our criteria as well as sound and insulation based. It can also be moved around. And it's waterproof. It's also raised off of the ground, so it has no foundations. And yeah, we'll be putting one of those up just to test this. It'll go up early next year. So that's the overall process that we have gone through, and that's the overall approach. And I hope everyone has learned from what we've done. Thank you.
Thanks, Tinashe. Looks like you timed yourself. Well done. I don't know if there are any questions for Tinashe. We've got 5 minutes that we can go into some questions. You answered mine in your last comment about when the start of this is going to be. Jürgens, over to you. Renee, could you support with unmiking? Thanks. Okay, you can unmute, Jürgen.
Yeah, Chairperson, thank you and good afternoon to the colleagues, and thanks for your interesting presentation. My name is Jürgens Duisel. I'm from the National Disaster Management Center, and I've listened with intent and the interest on, on the TRU issues, having, experience living through the 2022 floods and the myriad of other floods that we've had over the last few years, and the difficulty that we have in having to deal with, transitional or temporary residential units. And certainly when I look at this, it's interesting to see what are some of the ideas that we need to look at. Perhaps I can just share one or two things. In 2017, I was fortunate enough to spend about 6 weeks in Japan, and we were invited by JICA to have a look at how Japan actually deals with specifically this issue. And what Japan has done in terms of dealing with temporary residential units that would last longer than 5 days, in the sense of having to provide shelter to individuals that will be displaced for 5 days and longer, is to focus on building large-scale cities actually with containerized equipment. What they essentially did is they designed container, on the size of a container, but modules that can be linked together, i.e. a kitchen with a shower and a small, like a kitchenette or a dining room. And then in the other unit, they would put, for instance, 2 bedrooms.
Mm.
And these can be then used and moved with existing equipment and rail infrastructure throughout the country.
Mm.
So that when you need it within a certain space of time, within 5 days I need it in X area, you are able to put it on the existing network and you transport it there. And you hook it up either to temporary wet works, or you actually create, tankerized or septic tank mechanisms. Water is then provided by tank. Septic tanks provide, for sanitation and those kind of things. And then the electricity component, at that time it was generator based, but with the technology we have today, in terms of solar systems and so forth, I'm sure that they've adapted to that by now. That was essentially the approach that Japan was doing, and they were doing this on large scale. In one of the cities that we attended, there was more than 4,800 families that were living in various forms of these structures. And they were designed in a way that they can link to one another and be scaled according to the needs of the family. So if it is a single, mother-father kind of event, you only need 1 container. If it was a mechanism where you need 6 children, you could actually have a lounge and additional bedrooms attached, to these things. It was very innovative, very cost intense, but very innovative. And the way in which they were designed, it was also dealing with sound and heat, and they had built-in air conditioners and all of these things, given, the extremes of weather that some places in Japan are linked to. So I'm sure that you can perhaps look at some of those issues. The difficulty that I think we have not considered, in this, and maybe the question I want to ask is, to what extent have you engaged with the Department of Human Settlements in this? Because when we look at the provision of emergency shelter, we need to look at it in different dynamics. One dynamic is people are displaced. Within a few days, they can go back to their, to their residential spaces. Or for that matter, in KZN, we had incidents of flooding where entire houses were destroyed. They were, they're going to be there for months on end. In some places, people settled in rivers. So you couldn't put them back on that land. You had to find new accommodation. So I find it interesting, some of the proposals that you're looking at. The one, for instance, that you were talking about, finding unused urban spaces. There's actual legal precedent pertaining to that you also should look at. There was a sinkhole that formed in Babsfontein, I think it was around 2000s somewhere. But there was extensive legal work around that, where the community was actually evacuated to an area in Kyalami. And they were settled. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. I was just aware there was a hand, and I think that the points you're raising are really useful. Is it a conversation you'd like to have with Tinashe? Would an email conversation be useful between the two of you?
Well,
particularly around those some of the resources you're mentioning.
Yeah, Chair, the point I'm trying to make is some of the things, there's legal precedent.
Yeah.
Some of the issues, I think there are better innovations available. And then the question I have is, at what point would science and technology actually engage line departments? Because providing temporary residential units are not as simple as simply providing a particular building method. There are many more caveats, involved. The provision of land, the provision of the wet works that you are saying, all of these different things are provided by different role players. And, so I think we need to have a kind of a discussion on this, particularly when we talk about the people that will have to coordinate a disaster response in this. And then obviously what the cost would be, because one of the key issues that are preventing us from putting some of this down is that the cost of a TRU is sometimes more than a cost of a RDP house. And then maybe the last point I want to make is it does not take into consideration existing housing, in the formal sector that is not insured, because we saw in KZN there were houses that were destroyed that is not part of informal settlements or even low-cost settlements, and those individuals were not insured and therefore not covered by government, and they were left in the lurch. So it's not only about the poor, but it's about society as a whole. And one size fits all is not going to fit everybody. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry. I'm going to ask Renee and Majubu if you could please just have those points ready for our open discussion, because I think not all of them are directly addressing Tinashe's presentation. But I'd like to invite Crystal, if you could really be brief. You can ask your question.
Thank you, Cesar, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Crystal West. I'm from the Development Action Group. I have a quick question. I'd like to understand what the longevity is or the lifespan is of the unit that was showcased. The reality that we face is that, and my concern is around the term transitional. What does transitional mean? Because in our reality, transitional often becomes permanent. And so I just want to understand what that means in terms of CSIR's definition. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, that would be the last question for Tinashe. You can answer that before we go into the next presentation, Tinashe.
Thanks, Crystal, for your question, and thanks, Jürgen, as well. I hope we can have a discussion later. Crystal, speaking to your point, I assume you're speaking about the timber housing that's going to go up. So it's compressed modular timber units. It's something that you see typically more in Europe than you see in South Africa. It is quite permanent because these guys build these things all over the place. I know I'm not giving you a very technical answer, but it's something that can be used like forever and ever. They spoke to us last week and they put them at a holiday resort the other day. But part of what we are trying to do is test it for ourselves and have it on our test site where we can constantly look at it. But it seems like it's quite permanent by the sound of it.
Thank you. Please keep any questions you have, note them down yourselves or add them to the chat. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, and that's Mr. Faisal Sadat. He's from the Human Settlements Directorate in eThekwini, and he'll be speaking to us on a citywide informal settlement incremental upgrading strategy, as well as the risk identification tools for resilient settlements. Again, Faisal, you can set up your slide.
Thank you, Cesar. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm just going to share.
Just to alert everybody on the call that we are adding the bios of the speakers as they come on. You've got 15 minutes from now, and I will alert you when we get to the 2-minute mark. I'll give you a thumbs up to alert you that you've got 2 minutes left. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you are in slide mode.
Okay, I can start. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity, CSR, for giving me a chance to present on eThekwini. So just a very quick context. I think, probably I'm quite certain that eThekwini municipality has the highest number of informal settlements. Currently, we're sitting at 605, comprising nearly 333,000 households. And of course, I think all cities share the same challenges, urbanization, lack of developable land, etc., etc. And based on the funding that we receive from national and together with our delivery rates, it's going to take a number of years for us to actually meet that backlog. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I've got quite a few to go through. So from a policy research and governance perspective, I'm going to touch on the strategy that we have developed, approved by Council in 2022. I think it was probably the first in the country. It basically looks at an optimized approach to informal settlement upgrading, encompasses inclusivity, it's incremental in nature, relocations is a last resort, very much partnership-based, participative, programmatic, it's not one size fits all, and it tries to be flexible where possible. So I think we all acknowledge that it's impossible for government to provide everyone with a subsidized house, and given fiscal constraints, I think it's prudent that we look at how we can get communities to be more resilient, enable people to undertake self-help housing, and government plays a crucial role in at least providing the very basic municipal services where required. So a little bit of progress on our strategy. We've had code-driven solid waste solutions. Solid waste is a huge issue in settlements, and here we've partnered with a number of NGOs, CBOs to undertake solid waste collection initiatives. We've developed a statutory servitude bylaw with our legal services unit to be able to provide additional legal protection for municipal services that's intended to be installed on privately owned land. We've got a policy that we have drafted. We're looking at alternatives, 10-year solutions, and we've got working groups, or a working group dealing with that. We were looking at incremental land use arrangements with our development planning folk, and importantly, alternative and sustainable sanitation solutions for informal settlements is another area that we are trying to make inroads in. In terms of innovation and technology, we've got access to a number of tools, platforms, etc. I'm only going to touch very briefly on a few, but there are colleagues within the municipality who have partnered with external stakeholders to initiate many of these tools. The first that I'll touch on is the BEAM tool, funded by UNITEC. So BEAM is Building and Establishment Automated Mapper. It's very much an AI tool that begins to scan aerial photography and begin to capture the number of informal dwellings within a specified area. And this has been critical for us to get a good hold on the number of structures out there. So an image of the tool being able to capture the structures and do a count. Some of the challenges here is digitization of old plans is incomplete, and there's the opportunities is to train the algorithm on historic photography to identify trends, so we can see where there's growth in particular areas. Opportunity to inform disaster management initiatives in terms of where there has been, for instance, increase in structures near high-risk areas, and of course to learn with other local governments. Phase 2 of this BEAM tool is looking at the indigent count, focusing on backyards and rural housing at eThekwini. We've also got the Informal Settlement Information Management Solution, ISIMS. This was funded by UK Prosperity Fund. And here we looked at data needs at eThekwini and within not just human settlements, but within all departments at the city. So what we found is the collection of data and the analysis and integration and application has been a major challenge, and I'm sure it's a challenge for many cities as well. This project was part of the Durban Resilience Strategy, and it highlighted how without good data and reliable data, it's going to be very difficult to make strategic decisions. So this initiative was intended to allow us to undertake various programs, especially looking at national funded programs like the Informal Settlement Upgrading Partnership Grant, in order for us to prepare business plans, to build partnerships, improve social and economic interventions in informal settlements, and a lot of other outcomes. This gives you an idea of where data sits, and not just human settlements, but like a water and sanitation, electricity, development, engineering, and various internal and external organizations. We're looking at even NGOs, community-based organizations. How is the data collected? What format is it? How can we bring it together and make it work for us in terms of making better decisions for the development of informal settlements? So it was, the ISAMS was basically to facilitate improved collection, integration, and analysis of city-level data. Some of the opportunities is it eliminated some inefficiencies and duplications. There were existing data sets that we had already or could access, so there wasn't starting afresh, and it was the potential to expand further. But there were challenges, of course. Besides the major 5 service line departments, there were others that had data which we couldn't integrate. Data ownership and accountability. So certain departments were reluctant initially to provide data, and there's a high level of complexity, especially when there's multiple user types and the specific business requirements. Out of this ISAMS project, we are able to then look at an informal settlement data dashboard, and here we've got lots of attributes linked to each informal settlement. As I mentioned earlier, 605 informal settlements, and there's a number of attributes from household counts to ward numbers to ward councillors to the level of service provision in these settlements. We're also going further in terms of trying to indicate how far these settlements are to social and economic facilities, what's the development potential of the land, etc., etc., etc. So it gives anyone an indication of how well the settlement is located, what's its densities, what's its potential for upgrade, whether it needs to be relocated. So just snapshots of the dashboard. It gives you like the hectares covered, density, access to water, to electricity, fire hydrants, etc., etc. As I mentioned, ward councillor, even the zoning attributes to the settlements. This is the next tool. It was a service delivery monitoring tool called KOBO, used largely during COVID-19. This tool assisted the municipality in gathering data from communities. So on the ground, live data captured, and it provided line departments to respond accordingly to if there's burst pipes, etc., etc., and have these addressed and attended to. Of course, so communities we're now empowered to log faults. There was an element of improved reporting efficiency, And once again, this is just one tool of many, out of many, where we are trying to engage communities to play a more active role in informing municipality of issues on the ground. This initiative is the Risk-Informed Urban Development, RIUD, and it's part of the Connective Cities learning process. On this one, we've had our line department from development planning working on this together with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and it's part of their initiative called Making Cities Resilient 2030, so MCR 2030, supported by the German government, the SADC Secretariat, and GIZ. So this initiative looks at bringing, especially the SADC countries together, local governments partnering to work collaboratively on ways to promote local level resilience building. And here, once again, a focus on disaster risk reduction. A number of workshops were held. The last one was in June, and there's one in November being planned, where the emphasis will be on inclusivity, coordination, and shared responsibility. The next one is the Resilient Settlements for the Urban Poor, Rise Up, also a UN Habitat funded initiative. On this one, once again, I'm not going to spend too much time. It's in the inception phase, but we're looking at multi-layered vulnerability assessments, sourcing a range of data sets, one of them even being the CSIR Green Book, together with local data in order to create this assessment and be able to provide the city with the means of identifying especially communities that are at risk. The community-based flood early warning system is another one where, for instance, in partnership with the city, with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the system was developed successfully, and it led to, for instance, many lives being saved during the April 22 floods. Basically, it works with data coming from scientific data on weather conditions, it being then relayed back to communities on the ground via WhatsApp group, and people are able to predict heavy rainfall and take the necessary precautions at the time. Moving on to municipal practices and people-centered approaches. Here, we currently, well, also this is at the inception phase, the People's Plan for the Right to Housing in the Age of Climate Change. This is the Durban Coalition Initiative. And here, once again, we look working with a number of community groups and civil society on ways to incorporate community-based planning into our IDPs, make necessary budget adjustments, and ensure people are not forgotten. And I know I've got probably a minute left, CISO, so I'm just going to end on my last two slides. There's also community development program and public employment program opportunities where communities are involved. I think it increases the resilience if people are actively involved through a number of initiatives, whether it's waste collection, whether it's training for fire safety, and getting like economic development directorate involved, surveying settlements and ensuring that we're getting the appropriate data in order for us to plan for instance, service delivery. And finally, this is my last slide, and it's just maybe a precaution to everyone, is if we look at the data that we currently have on our settlements, we've got 238 informal settlements that are on the 100-year floodplain or close to streams. and the total number of households affected is roughly 13,000, or just over 13,300. However, if we look at the number of settlements, informal settlements that were affected by the 2022 floods, it was a total of 85. And of the 85, only 63 were actually located on floodplains. Okay, and so there were a few households affected. In total, it was, of the potential 13,300, 2,514 were affected. But the point I'm trying to make is that only 26% of the settlements were affected that were on floodplains. And in terms of percentage of households, it was 19%. So we've got to be very careful in terms of whatever tools we are developing, that it may not be, how can I say, an exact science and say, definitely, that settlement is going to be affected unless we've got historical data backing that up. What happens is many settlements that went in floodplains were affected because of infrastructure failures. Maybe there was a stormwater drain, further up that was compromised and created a disaster. So in planning, we've got to take into account the fact that it's not exact science, and some settlements or communities may be affected without us knowing why through these various tools. And I think going forward, the early warning, for example, the community-based early warning system, where we know historically there will be issues, can be used more effectively in responding to disasters. Thank you, Siso.
Thanks, Faisal. Sure. I think for somebody that experienced those the KZN floods, to see the response it's quite inspiring. I'm sure there are a number of questions from colleagues, and I'd like to open the floor now for a few minutes for us to ask some questions. Linda, you can go ahead.
Evening, colleagues, the chairperson. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very informative. Maybe on my side, from the observation of the floods, I think the emphasis also should be on the location of the settlement itself. If the area is conducive, I was just thinking of the landslides that were there, and also just to make sure that from our innovative perspective, especially in rural areas whereby other services are far and remote from the people, let us have a training whereby the so-called handyman or informal contractors are trained on how to assist those people when it comes to construction. Because over at the time, you can find that even if you do the damage assessment, you can find even the nails that were used are not correct. The construction of whatever that was built has a lot of loopholes. But with that, I think the colleagues are on the right path. It's just for us to augment and actually work as a team going forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lindani. Yeah, I think it's a critical thing to get people on the ground involved in being part of the response team. Are there any other comments? Mark earlier mentioned that eThekwini is the best municipality or the best city, and I don't know if there's any questions from you, Mark. Putting you on the spot for that one.
Sorry, just repeat the question.
I wonder if you've got any comments, seeing that you mentioned earlier that eThekwini is the best city earlier.
Yeah, look, not at this stage, but let me just check back on the notes.
Crystal? Oh, Faisal, is it a response or is it, can I let Crystal go first?
Let Crystal go first. It's just a comment I was going to make.
Crystal, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Faisal, thanks so much for the presentation. I noted that you indicated on several occasions you worked with Cork, PPT, and BESC, and I also was pleased to see that the People's Plan was included. I'm curious to understand the data collection that you undertook with communities using all of these different tools. So the engagement processes that, you know, in terms of engaging with communities and in developing the competencies to undertake this, was that done by municipal officials or were these done by civil society organizations? Thanks.
Thanks, Crystal. Faisal, you can go ahead, maybe responding to Crystal and then the comment you mentioned.
Yeah. Thanks, Crystal. So the engagement process was largely run by the NGOs and CBOs. So they played an important part. I think, sometimes communities have a higher trust level with independent bodies, and I think that probably provided or contributed to the success of this initiative. So yeah, it was largely run by NGOs and CBOs. So the comment I wanted to make is, and I'm talking purely from a human settlement perspective or a point of view, is that what happens is we once again we receive funding from national, and this funding obviously decreases, or we have budget cuts, and it's going to be across, I think, all departments, and as such, we've got very little to work with a growing backlog of housing. So the 333,000 informal settlement backlog, excluding people in backyards and the rural and the overcrowding, is going to grow, and it's going to take, if you do the sums, if we are delivering between 1,000 to 2,000 units per annum, you can imagine how long it'll take to actually meet that backlog. The point I'm trying to make is all cities probably have a pipeline of projects. So they plan and budget in terms of which, for example, informal settlements or greenfield projects they are going to implement. And when disasters happen, there's a lot of then disruption to that pipeline. So budgets that you have set aside for a particular project or projects now needs to be diverted. There's no new money that comes in. It's the same pot of money that municipalities will have to now juggle with and shift to other priorities. And what happens is often you find settlements that have been waiting in the queue for many, many years are sometimes now need to wait even further, especially in cases where there's new informal settlement growth. So sometimes if there's a new settlement that pops up on a floodplain, for instance, or in a high-risk area, you've got to now shift budgets to meet the demands of that particular need. So it's quite a huge challenge, and a lot of how can I say, expectations are put on human settlements, but actually it's a multi or intergovernmental responsibility, not just human settlements. I think all stakeholders, especially in government, whether it's province, national, and within local government, need to take responsibility for such. Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a whole of society response, and links to the comment that Lindani made earlier. Thank you very much, Faisal, and thanks for the comments that just came through. Our final speaker for today is Dr. Sandile Mbata. He's from SM Digital, and he'll be sharing on leveraging technological innovation to improve efficiencies in disaster response and community resilience. Dr. Mbata, you can put your slides up so long. Yeah, we've got, say, about 20, 25 minutes. Could go a little bit over, but yeah, I'll give you 15 minutes and then we can have a little bit of a discussion afterwards. I can see your slides.
A very good afternoon, Chair, and great to be in the graveyard shift of this talk. But I got upgraded. I had 10 minutes before, so just before we came through, I had 15 minutes. So I was in the economy class. Now I'm in business class. So I'll try to save you a bit of time. So what I'll do, first of all, let me just go back to my positionality. So I'm with SM Digital. I know a lot of people were like, isn't he with Cocta? No, I'm not with Cocta. I have a co-parenting relationship with Cocta on the National Strategic Hub work that I do. I'm involved in quite a number of other projects with the UN and others, but more as a consultant. But this my daily job, and what I do every day is figuring out how to make sort of meaningful input into the continent through SM Digital as a vehicle. So just really a brief introduction of what SM Digital is about. We're really a solutions company. So we're driven by a purpose to solve Africa's challenges. Our mission is to build these sovereign tools that build people-centered and that are people-centered and contextualized. Frankly, I'm tired of speaking about data and AI because I've been doing that for the past 9 years, and building some really amazing tools across local government and national government. But I've been thinking quite strongly about how does it make sense that an author talks about a pen and a paper, but doesn't talk about the poem? We would have been bored if Shakespeare did that. So to try and come up with these kind of solutions is something that's quite exciting. So one of the solutions we're coming up with is a disaster and community resilience application. Having been part of eThekwini from 1999, 2019, experienced the start of COVID, the 2021 unrest, the 2022 floods, and so forth. I had a first-hand experience working in local government on how fragmented communication is, where people are calling sort of different numbers, they post on social media different facts or different information. Some wait helplessly with no clear way to request specific help. And with dismay, I watched the paper-based inefficiency where emergency teams, which is not only a uniquely a eThekwini issue, it's a local government issue in South Africa, where emergency teams are going around with clipboards and forms, which delays critical data from reaching command centers, meaning that that information had to be typed. And I think it took an average about 3 days from collecting the information and having people typing that information so that the response could happen. And yet people are sitting in mass care centers and others are sitting in dangerous areas. But also, Chair, just before I started, one of the things I wanted to start with, to be honest, is also a gratitude to be able to present this in a warmth of our homes and our technology that works while there's people in the Philippines dealing with typhoons, there's people in Jamaica still recovering from Hurricane Melissa and many other disaster places. So it's a lot of gratitude to be able to speak about these fancy tools that we are trying to build to avoid this situation or to respond better, and yet there are people on the ground currently dealing with that. So I think it's important to always acknowledge that. There's currently no real-time visibility, so decision makers can't see the full disaster impact across communities, which leads to a lot of misallocation of resources. And what's happened in 2022, as an example, is that there was a lot of accusations of fraud, of corruption, because money couldn't reach the people that are being that need help the most. NGOs couldn't get the help and the support that they needed to get to communities because no one has that sort of real-time information to be able to respond to that. There's a huge digital divide, meaning that some of existing emergency systems require high-speed internet, smartphones, and all those kind of things, so they don't reach the communities they need to reach. The response delays, and I've mentioned that before, it's not just in hours in our context, it's really in days, where responders don't know exactly the people they need to provide resources to. So the cost of that is really lives that are lost, resources that are wasted, communities feeling abandoned and in dismay. So duplicated efforts where government and relief teams from civil society organization go to some communities, or there start to be a competition. And we know silently, without talking about it in this in this platform that there is poster boys of disaster response who thrive on the fact that government is apparently inefficient to respond to things. But when government says, can you share with us the list of people that you are responding to so that we can also see who you are supporting, they will not do that because their funders are funding them on that list. Whether that list is a truth or not is a different story. And I'm not casting any aspersions to those organizations, but that's the reality of the disaster response in a South African context. So really, the solutions we're bringing is really to establish sort of a first inclusive disaster management tool that is designed for low data functionality to ensure communities can be reached and every voice can be heard. And there's ways that we are trying to do that. So one part is really the sort of proactive preparedness to say, how do you take the disaster, the early warning and alerts via push notifications in a way that is digestible, whether people can read or not read, so they will know where the disaster is, and they will know how to respond to it. Could we provide safety guides and prepared checklist through this platform where these communities are able to see this on the go and on their mobile phones? And so the reactive response is really the incident reporting and the needs assessment that could be done through the app. So we're loading quite a number of questionnaires, and some of them we've learned through the disaster in KZN and in eThekwini in particular, to see how this disaster reporting could happen. And we'll go into detail in terms of the reporting that communities do themselves, reporting on each other and requesting support from each other, and how do you link those resources. And also the disaster teams, when they go out in the field, could they use the same, we want them to be able to use the same platform, and so that the disaster team in the command centers are able to dispatch the kind of help that's required. So it will be coordinated, data-driven, and it starts with this tool. So the disaster reporting journey really is a reporting where you view the recent and nearby disasters. You can report a new disaster, which is auto-geotagged, upload photos and text and voice notes. Part of what we want to do with uploading photos, we're putting a layer. So this is just above the prototype level. We're going to the MVP now, the minimum viable product. What we are now contemplating quite strongly is putting in a layer of AI that is able to read an image and say what's happening in the image. So when you take a photo of a bridge, it will then describe the damage on the bridge itself or on the house, because we've had that situation where people have to try to describe what's happening with that infrastructure that is taken care of, the photos that are being taken, and there isn't a clear sort of definition of that. So we're trying to see how that would look like if we plug in that AI layer. So the request part is that communities will be able to select a specific need required. So it's very icon-based, sort of multilingual interface. So we're focusing on icons, so people won't miss the icons. The categories we've included is food, water, shelter, medical aid, essentials, lost documents, and so forth. So we're looking at quite a number of things. Of course, we can custom make this because we also not just focusing on the South African context. We want to do Southern Africa and go through the entire continent so that this tool can be customized for each context. Then connecting is really making sure that we're connecting communities and disaster response teams, but also civil society organizations that are responding to disasters in certain instances, and they're helpful. But we want them to be a single view of what's going on, so a 360-degree view where everyone knows the kind of disaster that's taking place and the people that need help. Emergency teams to coordinate data-driven responses. And colleagues will agree with me, is that you will say there's a mass care center, it has 500 people, and that's all you know. You don't know how many people need chronic medication. You don't know how many people are women, need sanitary products. You don't know how many are children that need food and sanitary product. You don't know how many have mental health issues. So our response is really responding to people as numbers. So part of what we're building on, or built on the app, on this tool, is this form that captures who those people are. So we don't want to just see people as numbers, but as actual individuals that need that kind of tailored support. So the central command dashboard then will be, this information will feed into that space, which will be a web interface, and will have a little bit of mobile interface for government, the security cluster, the NGOs and the response teams. And we're hoping, of course, the National Disaster Management Center or whoever has an uptake on that will then be safeguard that within the protocols of how you respond to disaster. So it will be real time and geo mapped. So we'll visualize all the incoming reports on a live map, see clustering of where the incidents are to identify the most heavily affected areas so that you could direct the assistance there quickly. Chair, please just turn on your microphone when I'm running over time, but I'm going to almost finish now because I've been upgraded, so I don't want to then misbehave.
No, you're still fine.
Okay, behave like I'm still in economic class, right? Then there's an intelligent triage, which is a filter by incidents, by severity, by type, the location to prioritize a dispatch appropriate to the response. Then the issue of resource management to track and manage allocation of critical resources, including personnel, vehicles, and supplies. For us, this tool becomes powerful because if you're saying that there's a community, there's a mass care center in Germiston, or let's use Tikwini because that's where the most disasters have happened, climate disasters. There's a mass care center in Inanda. It has 500 people, and that's the truth that everyone knows. NGOs, government, and everyone knows that that's the disaster. How do you then start linking those 500 people to the resources that have either been donated directly to the Disaster Management Center, either at regional level within the Tikwini or at national level, and accounting for that, because you'll have 1:1 relationship in terms of support. At the moment, no one really knows. You say, here's a donation, go help people, they need warm food, and everyone just sends food, no accountability in terms of how many people were there, how many meals were prepared, and all those kind of things, and that reporting doesn't happen. And therefore, you don't create the kind of confidence you need to create with people that are supporting the disaster, people who are donating any resources. So direct communication. So we're building in a chatbot, which is a built-in interface which will allow citizens to send text and voice notes to request more information from disaster responders, reporters. The challenge we are trying to resolve as well is that after 24 hours on the chatbot, you can't respond back. So we're trying to figure out ways around that. One of the plugins we're putting in is seeing whether we can use an USSD front end to enable people to do *1 to whatever star, so that they could still get the information and be able to respond if they don't have access to WhatsApp. So that's, I'm not going to go into the details, the technical details of the paperless effort really into the offline capabilities with the auto sync when the forms are being collected and there's no internet. Once you get into a space where there's internet, you'll be able to then connect. The instant data sync process, the standardized forms. We've only looked at 4 forms at the moment in the household care center readiness. The mass care center readiness. Sometimes we send people to schools that have no water, no sanitation, because there's no readiness has been done. Household assessment, we don't do proper assessment on household. Even if we do, the disaster management center will go there, DSD will go there, and this is a real issue that has happened in this country. And then you'll have human settlements going then separately, saying, no, we're just looking at human settlement issues. DSD says we're looking at social development issues, and someone else going in overburdening communities and households that are dealing with disasters. Infrastructure damage assessment, that also we are trying to resolve the issue of the fact that it takes so long for the dispatch of the disaster fund, primarily because there's a whole lot of, it almost takes, I mean, my colleagues at DMC will attest to this, that it takes a couple of years to actually, for National Treasury and others to dispatch because they want to do verification. How do we then use a tool like this to take these photos and bring this information as evidence to say there has been disaster in this infrastructure that's visible, utilizing this tool? So I won't go into detail of the technology platform, that's immaterial for this conversation, but basically what we're trying to build is a tool that is inclusive and it built for everyone. We want to make sure that technology doesn't leave everyone behind, especially the critical technologies such as a disaster response technology. So we're building it in an inclusive way, making sure that most of the African languages are there as a layer. We want to use a very simple interface so we don't confuse people. We want to try and bring in a universal access We're bringing in a lot of accessible features. We're engaging with Vodacom and others to zero rate the app itself so that communities can download it even if they don't have any data. We're trying to explore the offline first principle to see whether it works without the internet and can it give the kind of information required. We're trying to make it lightweight. The community rollout, we want to make sure that councillors, community leaders, NGO, and faith-based organizations are part and parcel of trusting this tool. And we're engaging with the insurance companies to come on board as well, because I know that they often send text messages to their clients. Could they use this as a tool where how they can send the messages through the tool and the alerts, so everyone, then it becomes, we build a critical mass on the use of the application. So this is a prototype. It's not going to look like this at the end, but it's evolving and becoming better and better over time. But we are doing this, and wink, wink to Dr. Mosia, we're still doing it off our pockets, and hopefully at some point we get kind of support that we need in order to take it to the next level. We know we will do it in any case, so we're not going to wait until there's some funding or some support to do it, but I will do it because it comes from the part of my heart and my conviction that we need to make disaster response and resilience of communities more accessible. Ngiyabonga kakhulu Sihlalo Mhlangano, and thanks for listening to me in this graveyard part of the conversation. Appreciate it.
Sure, I was so excited. I thought it was, I just was about to ask, so where do we download? So you've answered that question. Are there any questions for Sandile? One thing that I noted in one of your closing remarks was something that aligns with what Jurgens and Basil said, just around the coordination of responses and the need for that alignment. I think that I wish we could solve it today, but it's definitely something that I think by starting conversations like this, or adding to existing conversations, we can contribute to the solution. I don't see any hands, and we have you can unmute yourself. The mics have been opened. Jurgens.
Yeah, Chair, if Sandile can just put his contact details in the chat if possible. I seem to have misplaced it. I would like to get in touch with him on one or two issues.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think that's a really important thing to note, is that sessions like today are intended for us to network. It is there's nowhere else we can engage on something topical like this. So do exchange numbers and emails, and we will certainly send the recordings a bit later. Okay, and then I just want to get an indication from Renee or Majubu if there are any questions in the chat that maybe I missed.
Cizo, no questions in the chat at this time.
It was too clear, Chair. It was just, that's it. Like nothing to discuss. We have to put money and effort into it, and we make it happen. That's the answer to all the unasked questions. It's gonna come online hopefully next year, April. Hopefully,
Okay.
We'll then share it with widely.
Okay, so we'll be in touch with both Tinashe and yourself with the launch of the publication or the start of the projects you're busy with. And if there's anything, Faisal, that you're busy with that you want people to be aware of, we certainly we'll keep in touch with you on that. I am going to take it that there are no questions, and I'm going to invite Dr. Napier to close the session for us. Bye from me.
Right. Good afternoon again. Thank you, everyone, for staying the course. I think this was a fascinating event, and it's really good to hear that people are working on so many aspects of the challenge and at so many scales. I'm not going to go through all of the aspects again, but from national, regional, national, citywide and all the way down to building products and information. And thank you also for DSTI and to Dr. Masia for opening with those very apposite comments. I think that is a very important clearinghouse for information and access to this information. We will, as we said, try to get some kind of recording from the HSRC speaker. And if you can, I've put some links in the chat. We'll send out an email to say that the presentations are available and that the recordings are available. And also, there's also a YouTube channel there that you can have a look at. So thank you to the speakers, to the audience, and for the positive engagement. And thanks for the backroom team, Matsubu, Rene, and Sizo today for facilitating. There's a lot of work that goes into to lead up to this point. I just wanted to mention one more thing. Apart from there being a climate resilience and a lot of material on the Urban Knowledge Exchange, there's also a new DSTI Alternative Building Technologies website called Technology for Service Delivery. That is, so some of those systems that Tinashe was talking about, and even the citizen apps that there's too many Sandile. Dr. Sandile has been speaking about. I think that's a very good platform for the release of some of this information to get the kind of responses that you need and to get them in time and when the information and the products and systems are needed. So, yeah, I think that I'd like to just thank everybody again for engaging and keep in touch. And if there's other topics coming up that you can think of that we should put into webinars, or if there's other kind of topics that we should be covering on the different websites, then please do get hold of us. Okay, thank you, Sizo. If you'll maybe just close, and if there's any other comments.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers, colleagues.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Bye.